I'll be co-hosting Airing Addiction with Lisa Blanchard.
No one story is the same as someone else's. Everybody's journey is different.
Thing on the table.
Having run substance use treatment programs for over 20 years, trying to make sure that we are welcoming to all. I love the idea that kind of having that exposure and that affirming place, even for one person, impacts that milieu, which then can impact maybe the broader recovery community, the community at large. I mean, I really love that thought.
Welcome to another edition of Airing Addiction. This happens to be a special one because it's Recovery Month, so we have a special guest today, Cathy Collins, and my co-host Lisa Blanchard. We'll hand it over to our guest and introduce her. Lisa?
Thank you so much, Cathy. I'm really excited to have this conversation today, and I'm really pleased to welcome Jaclyn Carnavale to our podcast today. So she's a parent educator in women in long-term recovery, and I'd love to just have you start us off, Jaclyn, with as much of your story as you want to share.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to be here. So my name is Jaclyn. I'm currently in recovery. I have 7 years. I work at a place called 18 Degrees. I'm their parent educator, peer recovery specialist. I'm actually the first one with a dual diagnosis. A dual role. So that's a big deal. But starting with my story, I think, so it obviously, like most stories, it starts in high school. I did things, I partied, I played around with stuff that I felt like all the other kids were doing, but it was really just the crowd I was in. But my actual full addiction didn't really start until 2005. I unexpectedly lost my little brother of a rare illness. He was 16 when he passed. Which, as you can tell, it was very hard on my entire family. But I used oxys to kind of get through it. And, it was like, okay, I got to get through the funeral. Okay, I got to get through this week. I need to help my parents. And then before I knew it, my best friend passed. She passed about, 8 months later. From some complications with addiction, and it just sent me in a tailspin. At that point, I was already fully in. I couldn't even function without drugs. We went through all the same stuff that everybody goes through, and my story's not that much different. My husband and I, dabbled with selling to kind of support our habit. We had our house raided. My daughter was very young. We went through, most of the crimes that people go through when they're drug related. But that, as hard as the raid was, it was our saving grace. Without that raid, neither my husband and I would be standing here today, because it was torture. It took me a while to finally get the message that I was sent, but it gave me that opportunity. It forced me into recovery. It let me see, the other side of things and how great my life could be. And I didn't get it right away. It took me about 4 years to fully get recovery. But without that happening, I don't think I ever would have tried. I really was in believing that my life was always going to be this way. I was always going to do drugs. We were always going to sell drugs. It just was what it was. So in 2014, I don't even know what clicked. I had tried Suboxone. I had tried detox. I had done all the stuff that everybody does. But just one day I left my job and I sat in the parking lot, pulled over into a parking lot of a grocery store. And I said to myself, okay, enough is enough. Like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I called Spectrum. It was my last resort. It was my last it was this or nothing. Like, it was this or I was done. I got in that next Tuesday and it was April. And I really connected with some of the staff there. I felt like I had finally found my peace. by June 6th, I was done with drugs. I haven't touched a drug since June 6th, 2014. Thank you. Yep. But I have to credit, Spectrum is a huge part of my recovery, their support, and methadone gets a bad name, but you have to work the program. I found, I jumped into the groups. I attached to my clinician, and I really started to open up. So in finding recovery, I found myself, and I always knew what I needed to work through, but I always had this attitude like, oh, it doesn't matter. It's the past. That's not the problem. But it was the problem. I needed to work through those things and not just shove them down. I've even had people refer to me as like a statue. I never showed emotion. I always stood strong, like nothing ever bothered me. And it wasn't until I was like, it's okay for me to be sad. It's okay for me to cry. It's okay for me to smile at people. That's when I started to find myself. So fast forward, about 3 years ago, I got a call from an employee at Spectrum. They asked if they could recommend me for a position as a recovery coach. And what's funny is I had already been talking to my husband about doing it, and we were looking into the classes and all this stuff. And all of a sudden I get this call. So it's for 18 degrees. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't have, I was a waitress. I have a high school diploma, but that's it. I waited tables. Great job. I love the people there still. They're my family. But I had no experience in anything else. I knew how to do drugs and wait tables. So I thought there was no way. I couldn't even do a resume, So I got help with my resume. I did it. Lo and behold, they hired me. They put me right through the Recovery Coach Academy. And it was about a year later, my boss admitted to me that, she had thought, okay, this girl can't even do a resume. It's not going to be a good fit. And here I am, I'm making big waves. I'm one test away from being state certified recovery coach. I get my card. Thank you. And then I'm, deciding how far I want this to go, if I want to get my LADAC or what I want to do. But I found my calling. I found where I can do the most. And a lot of people ask, well, do you get triggered? Do you have issues like working with people in addiction? And I do, but it gives me that power. It's almost my tool. I share my story as much as I need to help these other moms. And I couldn't ask for a better position right now.
It sounds like such an amazing story. As a woman in recovery, what I hear is you've added to your toolbox by being able to give it away. Yes, it can be triggering, but just the fact that you're empowered by it as well, because you have so much. It's such an amazing story because we've also on this podcast have interviewed people with regards to trauma. And I don't know if Lisa heard, of course, Lisa, because she's clinical. But the first thing I thought is there's another example of trauma leading us to need to medicate ourselves. And I'm just so happy you made that call when you were sick and tired and you're like, enough, I don't know what to do, but I'm calling Spectrum. Like that was the first step in your path.
Yes, it was. It was. And so much good has come out of it. I mean, I have an 18-year-old daughter. Unfortunately, she was with us through the thick of it. She was my rock. Like, I don't want to say
mother today.
Yes, she does. And not only did I find all this in recovery, but my husband and I were also able to have 2 more beautiful girls because we found recovery. So, I've been asked before, like, if you could go back, would you change it? And of course, I want to say yes, because nobody wants to go through that again. But I can't say yes because I wouldn't be this person here today. I wouldn't have my girls. I wouldn't have my husband. Like everything would be so different. But all of that, I wouldn't be me. This is my strength. This is my rock. Like this is my foundation. I do a activity with my families at work, and we call it the recovery house. And, it's basically like, who or what is your foundation? Like, who's in your house? Who's outside of your house? Who do you keep in the backyard, or what? And it just gives a whole new look. And I feel like my recovery is my foundation. My story is my foundation.
I have some things to say to your story, Jaclyn. It's always my absolute favorite, right? When I get to hear that the programs that we run at Spectrum make such a direct impact on people. So I get a little bit emotional. So I'll try to put that aside to just highlight some things that I really was struck by. Of course, the trauma, in your history, right? And recognizing that you do need to work through that. And we've done a lot of, podcasts and work on the impact that trauma has on your brain and how similar it is to the impact that substance use has on your brain, right? They really hit the same parts of your brain, and it makes it really hard, right? It's not that you are unmotivated, that you don't want anything different, that, you are choosing this. It's really that significant double impact and being able to work on, both of those. But I mean, the other thing that I loved, and I just think is so stigma breaking, right, is that you had tried other things, and all recovery pathways work for everybody. Like, everybody needs to find their own recovery pathway.
Absolutely.
You tried Suboxone, you had tried detox, you called Spectrum, started the methadone program, and found support there, right? And found structure and the connection that you needed to work through what you needed to work through. And I want people to hear that, you admitted in April, and by June you were done, right? You were entered recovery on medication. Like, I think people need to hear more of those recovery stories. And of course, it's not everybody's story. Like, there's some people it takes longer, multiple treatment episodes. I think that's just their own path, but it's also completely possible. The path that you've created, right, is also a completely possible
yes,
path.
it is.
And I'm obviously struck by how supportive the environment is, and of course, excited that the groups and all of that were helpful. But I just think it's because you chose that as your pathway, right? Like, you really actively worked on that recovery pathway.
Yes.
And the
yes,
thing
I answer. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I answer that a lot. A lot of people say, like, you get the stigma of, oh, you're just trading one thing for another. Oh, this, that. But I explain to people, like, I didn't just get recovery because I swallowed some medicine. Like, I engaged myself in the structure, like you brought up. I engaged myself in the groups. I took a look in the mirror, and I didn't just wake up one day like, oh, la-di-da, this medicine, I'm better now. My life is great. No, I worked hard. And I don't like it when people try to take that away from me, because it was only one little piece of my recovery. Yeah. It didn't make me get clean or whatever they say, it gave me a window into my path, and I did the work. I leaned on my support that I found there, all of that. So
yeah, medication do what they're supposed to do, right? Like, they help you feel better enough so that you're not feeling that cycle of use and withdrawal, so that you can start to think more clearly, so that you can do the recovery work, right? Yes. So that you can put yourself all in on that recovery work and feel better while you're doing it.
Yes.
That's the purpose of the medication, right? It's not a cure. It's not a magic, medication. There's no magic pill. There's none of that. Like, the recovery is the work. It's just a tool that helps you feel better, right? And keep faith. And I love how you described it that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I was going to say, since this is a podcast, and it's likely that majority of the people will hear this rather than view it, because we do go live on Facebook as we're doing it, but since majority of the people will hear it, I would like to just say, behind the scenes, looking at you, like, people need to see in their mind, if they could visualize a beautiful woman in recovery. You look healthy, you look happy, like, you make my heart happy, where I think the stigma, the stigma that builds in people's mind, if they saw you, it's remarkable. And I absolutely think you should be like the face of a woman in recovery in a clinic setting, or because everything that you've done right, and it shows on your face. Like, it just makes my heart really happy to see, really, you're doing the work.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And one of the other things you said really struck me, when you were suggested, by someone at Spectrum to try this, recovery coaching and connect with 18 Degrees, and you didn't have the skills. You felt like you didn't have the skills. But the reality is you did, right? You had that lived experience, and there's nothing like that lived experience. Like, I'm a clinician, have been for, a couple of decades now, right? I don't have that experience. I don't bring that to individuals, right? And there's really, such an important part of that. Like, you've lived recovery, and that lived experience really does make a huge difference for people.
It does.
You had everything you needed to do this work.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. It took me a while to figure that out, because you get, it's new. It's new. And it's something, change is hard, especially in recovery, because I felt like I found what works. If I mess it up, could it be the downfall of everything? What if it's too hard? How will I cope? What will I do? But I needed to trust myself that I built those tools. And my supervisor, we had a conversation the other day about, I used to not share that I was on methadone because of the stigma, right? And I would keep that to myself. And, my participants knew I was in recovery, obviously. I have a line that I tell them, like, when I say I've been there, I've been there. Like, it's not just something I'm saying to you. Like, I understand, and I've started to share that part of my recovery, and it's become so powerful, and like you said, Catherine, like, I am the side of recovery and MAT that needs to be shown.
Totally.
There's always a good side and a bad side to everything, right? And I just feel like MAT gets a bad name, especially, in some places in our community. It's shunned. It's not accepted. But you know what? It needs to be. It needs to be.
I would say to those people, they haven't met Jaclyn. Like, that's what I would say. You want to change your opinion, meet someone just like you, because I think people are so afraid of the stigma, but there's probably, for every one of you, there's probably 10 that aren't talking about it, but are in the, I don't know how many people are in the same, because no one's talking about it. I think you're doing a great job of breaking down the barrier so that people can ask questions, can see a face of it. And, we were talking before we went live about the things you're actually doing to help families. This right here is a tremendous step. To me, it's remarkable, because now people can have the conversation and say, I'm in recovery, but I can't live that experience either, because my recovery is from alcoholism. However, now I can say, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, you're not the person, but talking with you, I just feel like it's such a live example of breaking the stigma.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you for doing that. But also, if you're comfortable talking about how hard that is, right, and where you might have encountered stigma in recovery communities, even if people are well-meaning, and I think that's often the case, right? People are often well-meaning. They want people to enter long-term recovery. They just have stigma and biases about different pathways that are either not their own or are not what they believe to be the best pathway. And that's what creates stigma, even within our own recovery communities, right?
Absolutely.
And, can you talk at all about kind of where you've, you don't have to give examples, right? But where you've seen that kind of stigma and things that people might think about being on medications?
Absolutely. I mean, and like you said, it's well-minded. I mean, they're not, downing recovery at all. They're just, I found a lot of it comes from just not being educated, and they're only seeing that one side of MAT. I think, I talked with one of the program directors one time about, she was going to visit firehouses. And she wanted to kind of have me come and talk and let them see. They only see the overdoses. They only see the abuse of the medication. They're not seeing the recovery, the long-term effect, and I think that's so powerful. And I mean, you find it in meetings, you find it on the street, you find it everywhere. And I mean, I even found it at my job. It's like people make comments and they say things and they never really know who's sitting next to them.
Yeah.
and it just becomes, it's part of not being educated enough about it. It's their own biases, their own stigma. It's the way they feel about things. And you have to really it's not be all end all, right? It's not like the law. It's your feelings about it. It's what you think. So when you're voicing something and you're not really sure who's around you, and I just feel like they get this like cookie cutter idea of what MAT looks like. And, oh, well, you're still doing a drug. And, oh, well, it's no different than me being prescribed birth control, right? I'm trying to not get pregnant. Or insulin. And then
blood pressure medicine. I mean,
yes,
it's a medication
and I've had,
you're being prescribed.
Yes, and it doesn't fix it. You still have to do the work. If you're prescribed insulin, it doesn't fix everything. You still have to eat right and follow the program, right? Same thing as MAT. Same thing as MAT.
Yeah, I want to see an example of asthma. Actually, I have my inhaler right here because I'm actually a terrible asthmatic, right? And I use training all the time because I really am. I'm like, I don't take my controller medication like I'm supposed to. I don't follow my treatment protocol. So of course, when I have a recurrence of my asthma and now I'm on prednisone, nobody says that I shouldn't have that medication, right, to take care of my breathing. Even though there's definitely some choices that I might have made that, might have contributed to me not being on a good recovery pathway for my asthma. That doesn't even enter people's minds, right? They're like, just keep giving you your albuterol, you need it, right? Keep giving you medications whenever you need. And there's no, how long you should be on a medication, right? And when you should be off of it. Nobody says you should be over these inhalers by now, Lisa.
Get over it.
True, right? And, but we do say that, right, with medications, for addiction treatment, with medications for opioids. So we say this should be time limited. We say that you don't need this anymore. They say and it's just simply not true, right?
Right. I mean, I even had the argument with my parents. They didn't understand it. They saw me go, well, you're just getting drugs prescribed by a doctor now. So that's not getting better. You're getting worse. And the fight got pretty hairy, I left the house. I was upset. I didn't want to talk about it. And that was very, very early in my recovery. And now they are just so grateful for Spectrum and for the program because they not only see that I was able to fight the physical stuff, but I've grown and matured mentally. And it's a whole body experience. Recovery is whole body. It's mind, it's heart, it's soul. It's, down to my feet. And I just am grateful every day for MAT and for my program. They helped me a lot during my pregnancies because that can be scary. Being pregnant on MAT, and the stigma there. Right? The stigma there, and that's kind of where the work thing started, how can they give that drug to pregnant moms? How can they do that? That's ridiculous. What kind of mom would do that? Meanwhile, I was sitting right next to this person pregnant on methadone. But that, Spectrum really dived in and they helped me through that. They guided me through that. They gave me the information I needed. And nothing, until I had my child and watched that happen and lived through it, nothing is as powerful as that. But they did everything they could to prepare me for it. So I feel like every day I live is another step, another learning day in my recovery. Something is new every day. My family and I, we went apple picking on Sunday for the first time ever. And it just was a simple thing as apple picking. Here we are 7 years later, and it was my first time apple picking. And I used to think apple picking, I'm not doing that. Who's doing that? That's weird, or we got to find our stuff first. And it's just every day is a growth. Every day is just so powerful in my life. And every day I can learn something and share something. So
I guess the question I would have, because you mentioned your parents, but parents in general who have that same preconceived feeling about you're just taking another drug, a doctor's prescribed. What would you say to them if they're not if they can't take in your whole story, and I believe it's uneducated as well, but what would you say to them to like give their child a chance at this to get well?
I would say just that. Give your child a chance. Give it a chance. Let them work the program. It's not an overnight thing. I would remind them that they didn't get to their worst in addiction overnight, right? There was probably many months that they didn't even notice anything was happening. So let their recovery take time too. And don't judge it until you're able to see the differences. Don't make your child find recovery. Don't make it hard for them. Let them come to you. Let them explain it to you. Let them be happy that they found a pathway.
Right.
Don't knock it. Don't. And if you're worried about it, take advantage of the family support groups. Ask to see the clinician, get educated. Don't believe everything you see on the internet or on the street, right? Don't believe it all. Believe your story, your child's story. See what's in front of you, the real life in front of you.
That's so beautifully said. And a good segue just for me, and I mentioned this to you earlier, and I'm going to share the information so you can share it with your teams. But we do offer a family support group that's free at Spectrum. And so it had been Tuesdays for most of the summer, but we're shifting it to Wednesdays starting next week. And so if anybody listening, it's open to any community, anybody, no matter where you are, would like to, receive information about that, folks can just email magnolia@spectrumhealthsystems.org, and you'll get the Zoom link. But it's every Tuesday night at 6:00. And so it's that kind of support, right? Where we provide it's actually following the Magnolia Recovery Resources FAST program. And so it's providing education. So that's what people need. They need real information. Yes. And that's Maureen Kavanaugh at Magnolia started it that way. People need support, but they also need education. Right. So the first part of every one of those support groups for about 15, 20 minutes is a segment specific to the topic that we're doing that week on education, like real information about addiction, about recovery, about things like post-acute withdrawal, about medications, about the impact on the brain, like all the things that people need to know. And then plenty of time and availability for support for individuals to support each other, and then ending with some self-care and self-care activity. And so, that just struck me to tie into something we talked about before we started this morning, Jaclyn, about some of the work you're doing with families about recovery walks and fitness. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So my, whole caseload obviously is recovery based. And recently we were talking about how beautiful it is in the Berkshires this time of year. So I put together this recovery walk. We just go to the state forest, we walk. There could be a little activity with leaves or, things we find on our way, but it's mainly to kind of get my families together. Let these moms share their story. Let them feel like they're not alone. I was saying recovery can be so lonely sometimes. You don't really know if your story is the same or what you're going through. A lot of my moms have DCF involvement. So I just feel like it's so powerful because it's nothing structured. It's not an assignment. It's not sitting and listening. We actually walk and we talk and they get to know each other and they find support in each other. Because I can do so much, but to see that there's a few more of women that know what they're going through that can relate, that's super powerful. And then I'm going to be starting, I'm super grateful for the people that are helping me, but a recovery fitness group where we'll actually be doing some boxing and some, working out physically. And then I'm going to take them over to the park after and kind of do some mental stuff, decompress, talk to each other, kind of get that.
We all just accidentally got muted. You're back.
Yeah. So it's very powerful. It's another branch of kind of, peer recovery because they're not actually the peer recovery personnel, but they're in their spot, right? They know.
I love that. It sounds much like, and Lisa is the clinician, but it sounds like, is it experiential some sort of like you're processing, you're doing an activity, but you're able to then download and process how you feel about what was just happening. And the connection to people, I love that, because personally, I love to walk. And I think if I was out there, I would join your group, because to me, that's when, whenever I need to have a tough conversation with my husband, I was like, hey, you want to go for a walk? Because it's so much easier than having to look someone in the eyes and download everything. Like, we're talking, we're walking, it's physical.
Yes.
Like, I just feel like you can relate to someone if you're not having to stare in their eyes and share your stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because we all feel like, that we're, we can be judged, and we can, we feel like people are looking at us with their daggers in their eyes. And even if they're not, that's our stuff coming out. That's our insecurities. Those are our things. So like you said, walking and talking, it's such a relaxed atmosphere. You're not sitting on one side of the table and the other. It makes it so powerful. And there's nothing, it's not like I'm saying, hey, let's talk about this today. It's kind of like walk and get to know each other. Whatever comes up, comes up. And I've done it. I did it maybe 2 months ago. We did a summer type 1. And, a couple of the moms were just like, thank you so much for doing it. I felt so powerful. It's nice to hear that I'm not the only one. And I think that's such a powerful line.
Yeah, much like you said, for the first time in 7 years, you went apple picking. I remember doing things like that. And like, it's probably the same true for these women going out into the woods and going for a walk. It's like when we're drinking and drugging, we're not going out hiking and picking apples.
Right.
So it's like you're presenting a whole new world. Like, I remember seeing the sun differently than I ever saw it before when my eyes opened. It's like, wow, were the leaves always like that? Yes, I just wasn't there, That's what you're describing. You're presenting some simple beauty to people who can now see it.
Yes, absolutely.
And Jaclyn, I love one of the things you said earlier, and I think it's related to this when you said that recovery is a whole body experience, right? And one of the things that we know, and you've been through some really traumatic experiences, I'm sure that that's probably similar for a lot of the individuals that you're working with, probably have other traumatic experiences, because we know how hand-in-hand trauma and substance use disorder go together.
Yes.
And one of the things to really do with that is to get inside of your body. Right? To really kind of feel your body, right? And so going for a walk, like you're in the present moment, so it's mindful, you actually have movement, right? You can kind of feel that walk, and something about that can really be helpful to those conversations, right?
Yes.
Just putting yourself in that space. So I think it ties back to a lot of the principles that you really know,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just getting them out of the house is like a big deal. And I'm not just talking COVID wise. I mean, that on top of it, let's not, the mental health stuff with that has gotten out of control, but just getting them up and out of their house. And also, for me, it's not just for them.
Yeah.
For me to be there and see the smiles and the excitement and feel like I've done something that somebody did for me, and just to know that, they're not following me around like second graders, like, oh, we gotta do this walk, they're excited and they're happy and they're asking for more, so it does something for me as well.
Yeah. And so you had said a couple of things about how this work supports your recovery and reinforces it. Can you talk a little bit about how doing this work, kind of really, although you have to be, careful, good boundaries, all those things, but, really does support, your kind of long-term recovery?
Yes, absolutely. And boundaries is huge. You brought up boundaries. I'm grateful that my agency and my supervisor, they are big on boundaries. They have helped me find those boundaries, because I didn't know what to do. I was coming into a brand new position. Like I said, my position was a pilot position. So there was no guidance. There was no, what do I do? So I had to find it on my own. And I had a few instances where I wanted to run over and help one of my moms and sit there all day while she went to court. And it was like, I had to find those boundaries and I had to really keep those boundaries. It wasn't even just finding them, it was keeping them because it was affecting me too. I mean, how can you not be affected if you're a human, right? Just being a human, not to mention being in recovery and really seeing, where these women are and the things that they're going through and their own trauma. A lot of trauma that we share, a lot of trauma that I've heard throughout my recovery from a lot of other women and men in recovery. I remember when I first started, my big boss, my supervisor's boss, had asked me, well, you really need to be mindful of your triggers and keep yourself safe. And I said to her, I'm not going to be triggered. I'm secure in my recovery, and that blew up in my face. I can admit it now, I hope she's watching because, yay, you were right. But I had to know those, those triggers because they weren't something I dealt with before. Like I said, I had my own little eggshell. I went to my work that I'd been at for 15 years, waiting tables. They all knew me. We didn't have to talk about my recovery. I stepped out of my comfort zone. Right. So I had all these new triggers coming at me. So I had to do some work in recognizing them and owning them. And realizing that it doesn't matter how long I'm in recovery, there's going to be triggers, there's going to be, thoughts, but I've learned that they're just that. And I've learned that when I get, jittery about something, I only have to make it through 30 seconds at a time. And I tell my families that too, like, let's count to 30, count to 30. Let's see if it passes. If it hasn't, let's start over. Let's start over because eventually we're going to either focus on the counting or think of our happy place, right? Mine's at home with my kids. And I really learned to play the tape through, as they say, really kind of see where things could be if I stepped back in that life, what I have to lose. And it reminds me of where I was and how much work I've done. So I think that's powerful in itself, my job, when I'm helping these other families in recovery. It reminds me, and I'm an inspiration. I get a lot of them that they say, well, it's nice to know that I can be where you are someday.
Yeah.
And it's so inspiring. And the fact that you've taken all the recovery, it's inspiring to me that you've taken all the recovery coach classes and you're close to taking that final step. And to me, that's a lot of work. Like I know how much work it is. It's not small potatoes, and all of that is like seeing you give back. It's inspiring to anyone that you're sort of following through on something and making, and people saw it. That's another thing I love. You can see all the potential in people that can't see it in themselves. People saw that in you. The people, when you walked in the door at Spectrum, they saw it in you. And that kept you coming back, I'm certain.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I loved hearing, you really talked so eloquently about how you really used the program for what it was. You really took part in your groups. And I can hear in your words back some group material. Like I can hear that you really integrated that back, right? And that's just so wonderful, right? Like when you can really kind of learn things and then practice it, right? You might not need it right at that moment when you're in that group, right? But like later on in your recovery, you're gonna need that, right? When you say play that tape through, and that's just it's so inspiring. And the other thing that I really loved about what you just said is that, you're not doing this work in isolation, right? You found those boundaries with supervision, with support, and you use that support in order to continue to maintain those boundaries and keep that going. So that's one of the things I always really encourage people to do. Like these issues will always come up, regardless of where we come from in this work and what our role is. And we keep talking about it, right? Like we need to recognize that things will trigger us because of our own experiences, because of our own lives, regardless of where we're at, and how we handle that, and the support that we get to handle that is what will make the difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like, accepting that things aren't always going to be perfect. Like just because I found recovery doesn't mean there isn't stress. It doesn't mean that, people aren't going to pass and we're not going to lose friends and family. And it doesn't mean that my tire won't be flat when I go outside, but learning how to accept those things. And I talk to my participants about it, like real life stuff. Like it's real life. Like it could be worse. yes, the tire's flat, but 7 years ago, I was struggling to figure out how I was going to get the next drug and how I was going to keep my kid for one more day. You know, like, so the flat tire is not so bad, right? And as stressful as it is,
7 years ago.
Yes,
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And now accepting those things and knowing it's okay to be like, oh, okay, my tire's flat. I'm so frustrated, or cry because somebody passed, or I don't know, a relationship isn't going how you want it. Like learning how to deal with all those things without drugs and alcohol is tough. But when you find those coping mechanisms and you find the support and you learn to really lean on your team and use your support network, like it's powerful and it works, and I'm living proof of it. And I just hope that, you know, this will help somebody, you know.
Yeah, it definitely will. I think you should be the poster child for it. I'm going to nominate you as poster child for MAT. I would usually, because we're coming a little bit close to the end, we like to be pretty prompt with our guests. But one question that Lisa and I, particularly, I love this question because but we like to ask what sort of motivates you, you know, podcasts, books, listening to things. And what do you get inspired by in your free time, if you ever have any with 3 children?
Not a lot of free time, but I do really, really like some TED Talks. You know, non-specific, but I just like to be able to listen. I'm not a big book reader. I never have been, but I do enjoy TED Talks. I've been focusing a lot about stigma. I feel like education, trainings. I love to watch, you know, trainings on recovery coaching and addiction and all of that stuff. I feel like knowledge is power. So I really dive in. And also, the activities that I do with my families, those are helpful. I like to think about activities. I like to relate, you know, little simple activities and kind of gear them around addiction and recovery. So
I love fabulous. That. Yeah.
And I love that you're doing a lot around stigma, because this is why I'm so excited to have you on here to kind of wrap up Recovery Month. I couldn't think of a better guest, right? Because, you know, your being here is really breaking down so much stigma. But that doesn't mean we don't have more to do, right? There's
absolutely
still work there. And so we have to just keep having those conversations. We have to keep sharing these recovery stories. And so I know that it's not always easy because of the stigma that you face in general for being a woman in long-term recovery and for being, you know, on medications. And I'm just really grateful that you were willing to come on and share your story and talk about it, because I think that's the only thing that really breaks down stigma.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful to do this. And, you know, I'm willing to do it all because, like you said, you have to live it to break the stigma, right? I can tell people till I'm blue in the face that it's not right, but actually seeing and knowing this other side of recovery is a lot. It's very powerful.
You're such a lovely woman. It was such a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.